Members of the committee, my name is James Quintero. I represent the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and I want to thank you guys for taking up this matter today because it is of great importance when it comes to property rights, public safety, and the rule of law. And I'm ashamed to say that up until recently, I was relatively unaware of the squatting issue and the danger it poses to property owners here in the state of Texas. And so as I began to engage with the material that I was able to find online, I had a couple of observations that I wanted to lend to the committee, one of which is that there's a lot of misleading language around the issue. And perhaps the most egregious is this talk of squatters' rights. I want to be very clear, squatters don't have rights. Property owners have rights, period. And so as we debate the merits of these various proposals, I hope we keep in mind that there is no such thing as squatters' rights. The second thing that I've noticed that was very clear to me is that this issue is very pervasive, as we've heard today. You know, it didn't take me very long to dredge up 12 recent examples of bad behavior all throughout the state. I've included those various examples in my written testimony. I had to stop at 12 because of page count concerns, but I mean, it is widespread, be it from Houston to San Antonio to the Panhandle. These instances seem to be very prevalent all throughout. And of course, you know, that's just 12 examples. The NRHC cites in one of their reports that there's 475 cases noted in the DFW area alone, which makes Texas one of the more concerning states when it comes to this issue. Now, Senator Paxton, you raised a really interesting point about the instructional videos that are being circulated online. And I have to wonder if that plays a part given all of the concerns about the open border, right? If we have a very weak border security that is allowing an influx of migrants, and you pair that with a situation where people are circulating videos, migrants in particular are circulating videos about how easy it is to get possession of a home, then I have to imagine that that influences things in a bad direction. And so I think you make a very good point about the instructional videos and perhaps what influence they're having on this issue. Now, when I looked at these 12 examples that I provided to you, there were three characteristics that I thought were common amongst them. One of which is there's an obvious lack of clarity and quickness to the law. And one of the examples that I cited, there's a Houston realtor who actually had to work through the current eviction process. It took them a full year to get through that process. And then even when the judge came forward and ruled in her favor, she then had to wait several weeks in order for that to fully played out. So we're talking about more than a year of having to deal with a squatter in her situation. There's also the tendency to invite other harms. And what I mean is that when you allow a squatting situation to persist, what that does is it invites other potentially criminal activity. And there's one instance in there in Harris County where, quote, residents were saying that, and this is in addition to the squatting, residents were saying it was drug use, there was gunfire from there, and people were going in and out at all times of the night. And so, you know, it's
well, we had, until you mentioned it, we had 2 out of the 3 in these other 2.
That's right. And
but
so
you brought the gunfire back, you know, at the forefront.
So, you know, the more that we allow this squatting situation to persist, the more that we invite other dangers and harms to a community. And then, of course, the third thing that has been very clear here, especially in Terry Boyette's situation, is that there's a steep price tag associated with all of this. Homeowners are being asked to bear an enormous cost in order to contend with the situation, oftentimes very unfairly. I know Terry said that she had to leverage $150,000, which is absolutely insane to me. But there's another instance in there that's not quite as high that I thought was fairly egregious too. A San Antonio realtor had issues with a squatter, and he was asked to pay $7,500 in legal costs and then $50,000 to clean up the mess they left behind. So, I think that these instances are fairly widespread. So what do we do about this? There are 3 examples cited in the written testimony. We've got action being taken in other large states. You've got New York, Georgia, and Florida. And New York really didn't do a whole lot. What they did is they offered up a definitional change in their budget that makes a clearer distinction between tenant and squatter. They probably could have gone a little farther. In fact, there's some polling data that's cited in there that suggests they should have. But I offer that up as an example that even in liberal states, policymakers are beginning to take action. In Georgia, Mr. Howard, of course, ran through the 3-day notice process where a potential offender has to come forward with evidence, either a rental agreement or a lease, to show that they have some right to be on the property. I think that's a very good model to build from. But the best one from my vantage point is the piece of legislation that was passed in Florida that established a new process where if a property owner meets 3 criteria, then Florida law enforcement can take action immediately to remove the offender. And those 3 criteria are laid out in the written testimony. And then, of course, to initiate the process, what the property owner must do is file a complaint with the sheriff's office, and then it proceeds from there. The onus is then on the sheriff's office to go about collecting some information and investigating the matter and then reach a conclusion. So, and for their troubles, the sheriff's office is remitted a fee of some sort, so they are provided compensation for the effort. One of the other things that struck me while doing a bit of investigation into this matter is the fact that really there is no opposition here. If you look at the legislation that was passed in Georgia, the final vote count included no nay votes. If you look at the final bill in Florida, again, there were
Okay, let's don't rush so far
Yes,
past
sir.
that. Let's read this, okay? The act passed with near unanimous approval from Georgia House of Representatives. 167 yea, 0 nay, 6 not voting, and 7 excused. In the Georgia Senate, the final vote was closely matched. 54 yea, 0 nay, 0 not voting, 2 excused. In Florida's law, the third reading, it passed 108 yea, 0 nay, 12 other. In Florida Senate, adopted on third reading, 39 yea, 0 nay, and 1 other. Now, this isn't a red state, blue state issue. This is an everybody issue in this country because everybody has the rights to own property and to occupy what you own. Mm-hmm. And per what you said, there are no squatter rights to occupy what you do not own. And so this is important data because this shows that, look, in those states that pass these bills, there's a substantial Democrat, minority in those legislatures, okay? And they passed nearly unanimously. Mm-hmm. So I think, like property tax issues, this affects real people. And we've heard from 2 horrific examples, not counting all the realtors and everyone else's amalgamated experiences. And I think that's important research because this should be an American solution. This isn't a partisan solution. We're going to have a Texas solution to this. And I'm counting on TPPF to help me come take it back.
Yes, sir, we'll be there.
Okay.
And I think that's a very good point that you make. It's a nonpartisan issue. And I hope that encourages the body to come up with something that strongly favors property owners and property rights and rebalances the system in their favor, because right now the system does not. Now, if that weren't persuasive enough, the other thing that I'll mention is that there was some recent polling data. Newsweek conducted a poll through Redfield and Wilton strategies and found that some 61% oppose the concept of squatters' rights in general. So they are largely unpopular. And what's also of note is that 66% of people who believe a current law in New York is too lenient. So they were asking people whether or not the newly enacted change in New York was sufficient. Most people in New York said no. So I hope that does encourage the body again.
It's a tough town.
Yes, sir. So what do we do here? I asked my executive director and general counsel, what the proper policy prescription was, and he said, pass Florida's law. So, the recommendations that we have here very much favor the Florida model, and I hope you guys will take that into consideration because it does prove to be quite.
James, thanks for your testimony. Everybody got questions?
I haven't.
Okay, we'll go, vice chairman in waiting, and then go this way. Go ahead.
That would be me.
No, I'm teasing. For the day.
For the day, okay. Well, I think it's interesting, you mentioned that, just that basic concept that there are no squatters' rights. And I think that is implicit in everything we've heard, because we don't hear anyone who is a squatter or the person that is at issue here, they're never going in and saying, I'm a squatter. Right? They're saying, I own this, or I'm a tenant, I have a legitimate right to be here, but they're never invoking, I'm a squatter and I have rights, because they don't. And so I appreciate you making that point. Property owners have rights, and that's where we have to start. And I appreciate you bringing up that point.
Thank you, Senator. And one thing that I'd add to that is, because these people are presenting a false case, I think the body ought to consider enhancing criminal penalties for providing falsified documentation to either law enforcement or appropriate authorities.
That's a great idea.
That would be a deterrent, hopefully, to some,
Well, when
play
they
it
get
straight.
to that point, yes, because maybe they'll think twice and
Right.
pack their bags and get out. That's
yeah.
right. Senator Hall.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point, because right now there really are no consequences for being a squatter. And that is what has to change. And you only do that with deterrent there. What are the three criteria you mentioned Florida has that makes it real quick?
Great question, Senator. So I've got written down here. First, the individual has this is what they must prove, working through the sheriff's office. The individual has unlawfully entered and remains on the property. The individual has been directed to leave the property by the owner, but has not done so. And then lastly, the individual is not a current or former tenant in a legal dispute. And I think that's an important distinction, because if they're not a current or former tenant, then they occupy an entirely different space in my mind.
Okay. But if they're claiming to be, even though they weren't, does that throw that off, or how do you work
Well,
around
so I think in this case, the onus would be on the offender to provide documentation substantiating whether or not they are a current or former tenant.
Yeah, and I think we got to be careful in how we structure the language to make sure that we move the burden of proof onto the perpetrator.
Absolutely.
And I think the key thing there is the element of a previous tenant would change things, but other than that, would be up to them to prove that. Okay.
Senator Parker.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and James, thank you for being here. It was a really excellent testimony, and appreciated, just as Senator Paxton did it. But the big takeaway, I think, for all of us, again, is that squatters have no rights, and that will be absolutely the case in Texas. We'll prove that to the country in January of 25 and move this bill through quickly. I also appreciated the depth of the research and the recommendations, in particular with regard to tougher penalties. And the one thing that we've not talked about that we need to be very mindful of, I think, as it pertains to penalties and falsification, is that we now live in an AI world. And so I fear that AI is going to generate a lot of forged documents, a lot of things that will potentially create havoc throughout the real estate market broadly, not just when we talk about this issue specifically around squatting. And so I think we absolutely have to have a component piece that addresses the AI challenges with regard to this falsification piece broadly, in order to thoroughly tackle and address the issue. But again, appreciate the recommendations. I think they're excellent. And I think you and your colleagues at TPPF will be pleased with what we're able to do on a bipartisan basis here in the new session.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Okay. James, as always, thank you for the research. It's well documented, and I love the sites as usual.
Thanks, sir.
Okay, thank you.